woman. I grew up in a small village nestled in the heart of Mexico, a place steeped in tradition and folklore. One story in particular always sent chills down my spine: the legend of La Llorona, the weeping woman. It was said that her spirit wandered the rivers and lakes at night, crying for her lost children. As a child, I never truly believed the tales, dismissing them as mere ghost stories to keep us in line. That changed one fateful summer. I was home from university, enjoying the warm days and familiar faces. One evening, my friends and I decided to go to the riverbank for a late-night bonfire. The sky was clear, and the moon bathed the landscape in a silvery light. We brought guitars, food, and enough stories to last us until dawn. As the night deepened, our conversations turned to local legends. Inevitably, someone mentioned La Llorona. We laughed nervously, trying to brush off the discomfort that crept into our hearts. To lighten the mood, I suggested a dare. Whoever could stay closest to the river for the longest time would win. We all agreed, not wanting to seem cowardly in front of our friends. We gathered around the fire, the light casting flickering shadows on our faces, and took turns venturing near the water's edge. When it was my turn, I stood up, pretending to be braver than I felt. I walked slowly towards the river, the sound of the flowing water growing louder with each step. The moon reflected off the surface, creating an almost ethereal glow. As I stood there, listening to the sounds of the night, I heard it, a faint, mournful wailing. My heart skipped a beat, but I forced myself to remain calm. It was just the wind, I told myself. But the sound grew louder, more distinct, until it was unmistakable, a woman's cry, filled with sorrow and despair. I turned to look back at my friends, but they were huddled around the fire, seemingly oblivious to the noise. I swallowed hard and took a step back from the water. That's when I saw her. A figure, dressed in a tattered white gown, stood on the opposite bank. Her long, dark hair hung over her face, and she swayed slightly as if caught in a trance. I felt a chill run down my spine as I realized who it was: La Llorona. Her cries echoed through the night, filled with an otherworldly grief that made my blood run cold. I wanted to run, to scream for help, but I was frozen in place. The figure slowly lifted her head, and I saw her eyes, empty, hollow, and filled with an unfathomable sadness. She began to move towards the water, gliding rather than walking, her cries growing more intense. In a desperate attempt to break free from my paralysis, I stumbled backward, tripping over a rock and falling hard onto the ground. The impact snapped me out of my trance, and I scrambled to my feet, racing back to my friends. "Did you see her?" I gasped, my voice trembling. "La Llorona, she's real." They looked at me with a mixture of concern and disbelief, but before they could respond, the wailing grew louder, closer. The air grew cold, and a heavy silence fell over the group. We huddled together, eyes wide with fear, as the figure of La Llorona emerged from the shadows, her mournful cries piercing the night. Panicked, we grabbed our things and fled, the legend no longer a mere story but a terrifying reality. As we ran, I could hear her cries fading into the distance, but the fear lingered, a constant reminder of what we had witnessed. In the days that followed, I couldn't shake the image of La Llorona from my mind. Her hollow eyes and sorrowful wails haunted my dreams, leaving me restless and uneasy. I knew I needed to understand more about her, to find some way to lay her spirit to rest. I visited the village elder, Don Javier, a man known for his knowledge of local lore and the supernatural. When I told him what we had seen, he nodded gravely, not surprised by our encounter. "La Llorona's story is one of great tragedy," he said, his voice heavy with sorrow. "She was once a beautiful woman named Maria, who fell in love with a wealthy man. They had 2 children, but their happiness was short-lived. When her husband left her for another woman, Maria was consumed by grief and madness. In her despair, she drowned her children in the river, and then herself. Her spirit is cursed to wander the earth, searching for her lost children, crying for her sins, "Is there any way to help her?" I asked, desperate to find a solution. Don Javier sighed, shaking his head. "Her pain is eternal, but there are rituals that can offer her some peace. You must go to the river at midnight with offerings of flowers and candles. Speak to her spirit and ask for forgiveness on her behalf. It may not free her, but it might soothe her torment." Determined, I gathered the necessary items and returned to the river that night. My friends, though reluctant, joined me, their fear tempered by a sense of duty. We stood by the water's edge, the moon high above us, and arranged the flowers and candles in a circle. As midnight approached, we lit the candles and began to speak, our voices trembling but resolute. We asked for Maria's forgiveness, for her spirit to find peace, and for the river to cleanse her soul. The air grew colder, and the water seemed to still as if listening to our plea. For a moment, there was silence. Then, the faintest sound of weeping reached our ears, soft and sorrowful. A figure appeared on the opposite bank, but this time, she did not approach. She stood there, her cries quieter, less anguished. It was as if she heard us, understood us. We stayed until the candles burned out, and when we finally left, there was a sense of calm in the air. The wailing of La Llorona had faded, and though her spirit was not completely at rest, it seemed we had offered her some solace. In the years that followed, the sightings of La Llorona became less frequent, her cries no longer haunting the nights as they once did. The legend of the weeping woman remained, a reminder of the pain and tragedy that can linger beyond death. I often returned to the river, leaving flowers and lighting candles, a small gesture to honor her memory. And every now and then, on quiet nights, I think I can hear a soft, distant weeping, an echo of a sorrow that will never fully fade, but one that has found a measure of peace.